Hello, boys and girls, and welcome to this prediction show for the World Cup. Now, if you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed to the channel, as we have lots coming up throughout the World Cup. We have already done a podcast, so make sure you check that out. Yesterday, it goes into all the ins and outs of the England squad and wrapping up the Premier League. But before we get to that, we are, as always, in a heated competition with Mr. Michael Hawes. How you doing?
Yeah, good, thank you, mate.
That's very good. We have a new shiny setup for this England prediction. We will get to it eventually. But before we get into things, usually we predict Premier League games, but if you've been living under a rock for the last, 18 months, there is a World Cup in the middle of the season. So that has now stopped, and we are going to have to predict some World Cup games. So luckily, England are the second game to kick off, I think, which means that we have the opener against Qatar versus Ecuador and England versus Iran to predict. But before we get into that, we need to know where we stand. So, Mike, where are we with the points?
Okay, so for those of you that do tune into the podcast on a weekly basis, as you quite rightly said, we do have the coveted FIFA Day trophy predictions trophy, as you've I'm sure you will model at some point. Look at that, it is beautiful. I am currently two-time champion, Ian. You are on a one-time. So I'm desperately trying to get it back for this season. So we did make some predictions last week. West Ham took on Leicester and Wolves versus Arsenal. Just to recap on a couple of the predictions, I had 1-1 for West Ham Leicester. You had 3-1 to Leicester. The score was 2-0. Therefore, you get a point for the correct result, not the correct score. And I get 0 points. And then coming to the Wolves versus Arsenal game, you had a very ambitious 5-1 to Arsenal, and I had 2-1 to Arsenal. The score was 2-0. We managed to keep a clean sheet, so it's a point each for the correct result. So the total points for this week, Ian, you are on 2 points, and I am on 1 point for this week. So will Michael or myself finish on top of the table come the Christmas break? Well, no, because we're doing the World Cup. Ian, you are currently sitting on 26 points.
Yep.
And I am sitting on 27.
Whee.
So I've still got the slight advantage over you. But it could all change with, as you mentioned, World Cup to come. So definitely more predictions are going to be coming on a weekly basis. And no doubt we'll be able to update this on Monday after the England game.
Yes. So the question is, Mike, do you want to predict the Qatar-Ecuador game first, or do you want to predict the England-Iran game first?
I'm going to go for Qatar versus Ecuador because I know nothing about those sorts of teams. Ecuador, I would say, have got the more credible footballing pedigree out of the two teams. I think Qatar are only in it just because they are hosting. Definitely no shady backhanders that were taken in this World Cup bid. So I am going to go for 3-1 to Ecuador on this one.
Fair enough. Now, I am going to seem like an Ecuadorian sport culture person, because I do know that Moise Caicedo, who plays for Brighton in the midfield, the young 21-year-old Ecuadorian, if you will, is going to be manning that midfield. And also for West Ham fans, Enner Valencia. He's now 32, but he is still playing out in the Outer Hebrides. He's also probably going to start, and I think this is going to be an absolutely weird and wonderful thing. Now, usually World Cups start on a 0-0. I think this is going to be like 7-1 to Ecuador. This is going to be an absolute abysmal of a football game for opening the World Cup, and Qatar are going to get harangued, and then their government's going to arrest everybody for mistaking the Ecuadorian flag for a rainbow one, and it's all going to be very bad. But yeah, 7-1 to Ecuador. That's my prediction for the opener. It's going to be an interesting World Cup, I'll tell you that.
Yes, absolutely. And I I heard on the news earlier that the Budweiser, who are the official sponsor of the World Cup,
Yep.
can no longer have their beer stands outside the venues anymore.
That's
and
correct.
That announcement apparently come on Saturday.
Yep.
So nothing like leaving it till the last minute.
Now, see, just to get slightly political, if that is a country's belief and that's how they want to run it, fair play to them. They've stuck to their guns and they've said what they're going to do. They've never been behind closed doors with this sort of thing. So I could sort of commend that they've gone, we're not going to bow to pressure. We're going to do what we want to do, as much as it's going to be surreal for everybody. But leading on, before we get ourselves into trouble, or more like I get myself into trouble, England, they take on Iran. Now, if you haven't already seen in the podcast, I have a very, very opinionated view on England in this tournament. And it's not going to go particularly well for us in the first game. I have this down as a 1-1 draw. That's all I'm going to say. Check out the podcast if you want more.
Do you know what? From listening to you whilst we were recording the podcast, I think that was actually very reserved. Definitely a lot fierier in the podcast. And as Ian said, go and check it out. So for me, England versus Iran, I am going to try and be a bit more patriotic about it. I would love to see us go deep into the tournament, but at the same time, with the number of players or key players that we have in the competition, it possibly wouldn't be such a bad thing if all of our players got eliminated from the tournament very early. But positive. I'm going to go for 2-1 to England on this one.
2-1
I'm going to go
England.
for a Saka goal and a Harry Kane goal.
So I know I said it would be an interesting tournament, but with Ecuador spanking Qatar and England going deep in Qatar, it's certainly going to be interesting. Make sure that you leave your predictions for those games in the comment section below so you can join in all the fun on the channel. Until then, I've been Ian.
I've been Mike.
And we will see you for the podcast after the England game.